You're sitting at your desk scrolling through social media, and another finance influencer just posted their usual sermon about how you need $11 million to be in the top 1%. You look at your bank account. You're 32 years old. You got maybe 85,000 in savings and retirement combined, and you feel like a complete failure because you're nowhere close to 11 million. Except here's what nobody's telling you. That $11 million number, it's a lie. Not because it's factually incorrect, but because it's completely irrelevant to you. A 32-year-old in the actual top 1% of their age group doesn't have $11 million. They don't even have close to that. And the fact that you're comparing yourself to a number that includes 65-year-olds who've had 3 decades more than you to accumulate wealth is exactly why you feel hopelessly behind when you might actually be crushing it. My name is Alex, and I've spent the last 8 years analyzing wealth data from the Federal Reserve, tracking how net worth actually accumulates over a lifetime, and watching people torture themselves with the wrong benchmarks. The top 1% isn't one number. It's a moving target that changes dramatically with every decade of your life. And when you see the actual age-specific thresholds, everything changes. Your anxiety about being behind might evaporate. Or you might realize you need to make dramatic changes right now before it's too late. Either way, you'll finally know where you actually stand. If you want to understand wealth accumulation in a way that actually makes sense for your life stage, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Because what I'm about to show you is data that most people never see broken down this way. Here's the trap. When someone tells you the top 1% threshold is $11 million, they're giving you a number that represents every age group combined. That's like telling a high school sophomore they're failing at life because they're not as educated as someone with a doctorate. The comparison is absurd. A 25-year-old hasn't had time to accumulate $11 million through normal wealth-building strategies. Even with a fantastic salary and aggressive saving, the math doesn't work. You'd need to save over $300,000 per year starting at age 22 just to hit $11 million by 55. And that's assuming decent investment returns and zero major life expenses. No house, no kids, no medical emergencies, no living your actual life. But here's what happens when you don't know the age-specific numbers. You set completely inappropriate goals. You feel constant anxiety about your financial progress. And worst of all, you make terrible decisions trying to catch up to a benchmark that was never meant for your age group. I've watched 30-year-olds take absurd risks with cryptocurrency or over-leveraged real estate deals because they think they're desperately behind, when in reality, they're actually in the top 15% of their actual peer group. The psychological damage of wrong benchmarks is real. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the most comprehensive wealth data we have, released in October of 2023 with data from 2022, the wealth distribution in America looks completely different when you break it down by age. And Financial Samurai, run by Sam Dogan, who's been analyzing this data for over a decade, has broken down these thresholds in a way that actually makes sense for real people trying to build wealth. Let's start with the young professionals, because this is where the confusion is most damaging. If you're under 25 years old, the top 1% threshold for your age group is approximately $250,000 in net worth, not 11 million, not even 1 million, $250,000. Now, I know what you're thinking. That still sounds impossible when you're 24 and just finished college with $40,000 in student loans. And you're right, it is exceptionally difficult. But here's what that number tells you. If you're under 25 with a net worth of $250,000, you either inherited money, you started a successful business very young, or you've been extraordinarily strategic about high income and low expenses. For everyone else, this number shows you what elite looks like, and it's a target you might actually hit by your late 20s with the right moves. Now we get to the part where it starts getting interesting, because the numbers begin to reveal how wealth actually compounds over time. For people aged 25 to 29, the top 1% threshold jumps to approximately $610,000. Notice that jump. In 5 years, the threshold more than doubles. This isn't because people suddenly start making twice as much money. It's because this is when the compounding effect starts to kick in. The people who started investing at 22 or 23 have had 5 to 7 years of market returns. The people who bought real estate early have had property appreciation. The people who joined startups have potentially had liquidity events. Time is doing its work. But here's where most people mess this up. They see $610,000 at age 29 and think they need to hit that exact number or they've failed. That's not how this works. These top 1% thresholds aren't goals for normal wealth building. They're data points that show you what exceptional looks like. If you're 29 with a net worth of $200,000, you're not in the top 1%, but you're probably in the top 10 to 15%. You're doing better than 85 to 90% of your peers. That's not failure. That's success that doesn't feel like success because you're using the wrong measuring stick. Let me tell you what happens in your 30s, because this is the critical decade. The decade where wealth either accelerates dramatically or stagnates in a way that becomes very difficult to recover from later. For people aged 30 to 34, the top 1% threshold is approximately $1.3 million. Look at that jump again, from $600,000 to $1.3 million in just 5 years. This is where career earnings typically start to peak for high performers. This is where early investments have had 10 to 12 years to compound. This is where real estate equity starts to build meaningfully. And this is where the gap between people who started building wealth in their 20s and people who didn't becomes painfully obvious. For the 35 to 39 age bracket, that threshold climbs to approximately $2.5 million. Now we're seeing the exponential curve really take shape. The difference between 30 and 40 isn't linear. It's not just twice as much because you had twice as much time. It's exponential because of how compound growth works. The person who started investing $500 per month at age 22 doesn't just have more money than the person who started at 32. They have dramatically more money because those early contributions had extra years to double and triple through market returns. Here's what I need you to understand about these 30s thresholds, because this is where the psychological trap becomes most dangerous. If you're 35 years old with a net worth of $400,000, you're not in the top 1%. You're probably in the top 20%. You're objectively doing well. But if you're comparing yourself to that $2.5 million threshold, you feel like you're failing catastrophically. You're not. You're just using a benchmark designed for people who are 3 standard deviations above the median. It's like a recreational runner comparing their marathon time to Olympic qualifying standards and feeling terrible that they're not fast enough. Now let me show you what happens when time really starts to work its magic, because the numbers in your 40s and 50s reveal the brutal truth about wealth accumulation. For people aged 40 to 44, the top 1% threshold is approximately $4.2 million. For the 45 to 49 bracket, it's approximately $6.3 million. And for people aged 50 to 44, we're looking at approximately $8.7 million. Do you see what's happening? The gap between each 5-year bracket keeps growing. From 30 to 35, the jump was about 1.2 million. From 40 to 45, the jump is over 2 million. From 45 to 50, it's 2.4 million. This is compound growth visualized through age brackets. If you've made it this far, you're already ahead of 90% of people who never bother to understand age-appropriate benchmarks. But don't stop now, because what comes next is where you learn whether you're actually on track or if you need to make dramatic changes. The people hitting these 40s and 50s thresholds aren't just saving more money than everyone else. They're experiencing the full force of compound returns on investments they made 20 to 30 years earlier. They're sitting on real estate they bought when prices were lower. They're holding stock portfolios that have survived multiple market cycles and come out exponentially larger. They're reaping the benefits of career equity, business equity, and time equity that younger people simply haven't had the opportunity to build yet. This is why comparing a 32-year-old to a 52-year-old using the same wealth benchmark is financial malpractice. But here's where it gets even more intense. For people aged 55 to 59, right before typical retirement age, the top 1% threshold is approximately $10.8 million. We're finally approaching that $11 million number that gets thrown around as the universal 1% threshold. And for people 60 to 64, it's approximately $12.1 million. For people 65 and older, the top 1% threshold is approximately $13.6 million. That's the number. That's where the 11 to 13 million range comes from. It's the threshold for people at the absolute peak of their wealth accumulation journey. Now here's what this age progression reveals that nobody talks about. The difference between being on track for top percentile wealth and falling behind happens in your 20s and 30s, but you don't see the results until your 40s and 50s. This is the cruel irony of compound growth. The decisions that matter most happen when you're least equipped to understand them. The 25-year-old who starts investing $400 per month and the 25-year-old who spends that $400 per month on car payments are making a choice that will result in a multi-million-dollar difference by age 55. But at age 25, that difference is invisible. According to data from Empower Personal Dashboard analyzing millions of users in October of 2025, the median 30-year-old has a net worth of approximately $47,000. The median 40-year-old has approximately $87,000. The median 50-year-old has approximately $404,000. These are median numbers, meaning half of people have less than this. So when you see that the top 1% threshold for a 50-year-old is 8.7 million, you understand just how extreme that top percentile is. The median 50-year-old would need to more than 20 times their net worth to reach the 1% threshold for their age. But here's what's useful about knowing both numbers. You can see the full spectrum. If you're 50 with $800,000 in net worth, you're not in the top 1%, but you're nearly double the median. You're probably in the top 25%. That's valuable information. It tells you that you're ahead of most people your age, even if you're not in the ultra-high net worth category. And it tells you whether catching up to higher percentiles is realistic or if you need to adjust your retirement expectations. Let me show you how to actually use these numbers, because raw data without application is worthless. First, find your age bracket and the corresponding top 1% threshold. Then calculate your current net worth, everything you own minus everything you owe. Your retirement accounts, your taxable investment accounts, your home equity, your business equity if you own one, minus your mortgage, your student loans, your credit card debt, everything. Now you have your actual number and your age-appropriate 1% threshold. If you're within 50% of that threshold, you're in striking distance. You're probably already in the top 5 to 10%, and with aggressive saving and investing, you could realistically reach 1% status within 10 to 15 years. If you're at 25 to 50% of the threshold, you're solidly upper middle class for your age bracket, probably top 15 to 25%. You're doing well, but reaching the 1% would require either dramatic income increases or an extended timeline. If you're under 25% of the threshold, you're closer to median, and reaching 1% status would require either extraordinary circumstances like a business exit or inheritance, or a complete financial transformation sustained over decades. Here's the psychological piece that changes everything, and this is what most financial content completely misses. Your relationship with money isn't just about the numbers. It's about the story you tell yourself about those numbers. When a 35-year-old looks at their $300,000 net worth and compares it to the overall $11 million 1% threshold, the story they tell themselves is, "I'm failing. I'm so far behind I'll never catch up. What's the point?" That story leads to either destructive risk-taking or complete financial paralysis. But when that same 35-year-old compares their $300,000 to the age-appropriate threshold of $2.5 million, and then looks at the median net worth for 35-year-olds, which is around $76,000 according to Federal Reserve data, the story changes completely. Now the story is, I'm not in the 1%, but I have 4 times the median net worth for my age. I'm in the top 20 to 30%. I'm actually doing pretty well, and if I keep this trajectory, I'll be in even better shape in 10 years. Same person, same net worth. Completely different psychological outcome based on using the right benchmark. This is why financial comparison is either the most motivating or most destructive force in your wealth-building journey. The right comparison shows you that you're making progress and gives you realistic targets. The wrong comparison convinces you that you're hopelessly behind and leads to either reckless decisions or giving up entirely. Fidelity Investments released data in Q3 of 2025 showing that the average 401k balance for people in their 30s is approximately $54,000. For people in their 40s, it's about $126,000. For people in their 50s, it's approximately $203,000. These are just retirement accounts, not total net worth, but they're useful because they show you what typical retirement saving looks like. When you realize that the average person in their 50s has only about $200,000 saved for retirement, you understand why most people aren't anywhere close to these 1% thresholds. You're not competing against some universal standard of financial success. You're on a spectrum where most people are struggling, some people are comfortable, and a tiny fraction are in the stratosphere. Here's what these age-based thresholds teach you about the actual mechanics of wealth building. Wealth accumulation follows a J-curve. It's painfully slow in your 20s. You're dealing with entry-level salaries, student loans, and learning basic financial competence. Progress feels impossible. In your 30s, if you've made good decisions, things start to accelerate. Your income grows. Your investments start compounding noticeably. You build equity and assets. In your 40s and 50s, if you stayed on track, the acceleration becomes exponential. This is when compound growth really shows up. Your investments from 20 years ago have potentially quadrupled or more. Your real estate has appreciated significantly. Your career equity and business equity peak. But here's the brutal part. If you're not on track by your early 40s, catching up becomes exponentially harder. Not impossible, but harder. Because you've lost the most valuable component of wealth building, which is time. A 45-year-old who wants to retire at 65 with $2 million needs to save and invest dramatically more per year than a 25-year-old targeting the same number, even though the 45-year-old likely has higher income. The math is unforgiving. Let me give you the practical action items, because data without direction is just trivia. First, calculate your current net worth accurately. Use a spreadsheet. List every asset at current market value. List every debt at current balance. Subtract debts from assets. That's your net worth. Second, find your age bracket's 1% threshold and median net worth using Federal Reserve data or calculators from sites like DQYDJ. Third, identify where you fall on that spectrum. Are you below median? At median? At median? Above median but below top quartile? In top quartile but below 1%. Fourth, and this is critical, set age-appropriate goals based on where you actually are, not where you wish you were. If you're 30 with $60,000 in net worth and the median for your age is about $47,000, your goal shouldn't be to hit $1.3 million in the next 4 years. That's fantasy. Your goal should be to reach $150,000 by 35, which would put you well above median and on track for top quartile by your 40s. That's ambitious, but realistic. It gives you a target that will actually motivate you instead of demoralize you. If you're 40 with $500,000 in net worth, you're roughly double the median for your age. You're doing well. Your goal might be to reach $1.2 million by 50, which would put you in the top 15 to 20% and set you up for a comfortable retirement. You're not going to hit the 8.7 million 1% threshold by 50 unless something extraordinary happens, and that's okay. You don't need to be in the 1% to be financially successful. Here's what nobody tells you about these percentiles. The difference in quality of life between the 70th percentile and the 95th percentile is meaningful but not life-changing. You might have a nicer house, better vacations, more financial security, but the difference between the 50th percentile and the 70th percentile is potentially life-changing. That's the difference between financial stress and financial stability. That's the difference between working until you physically can't anymore and retiring on your own terms. That's where your energy should go. Getting from median to top quartile. Not from top quartile to top 1%, unless you're already naturally on that trajectory. The real magic happens in your brain when you understand this. Because once you stop chasing inappropriate benchmarks, you can focus on the wealth-building behaviors that actually work for your situation. You can focus on increasing your income through skill development and career moves. You can focus on keeping your lifestyle inflation under control so your savings rate stays high even as income grows. You can focus on consistent investing in diversified assets over decades. You can focus on building valuable skills or businesses that create equity beyond just trading time for money. The person who makes $85,000 per year, saves 20% of their income, invests it consistently in index funds, avoids lifestyle inflation, and does this for 30 years will end up in the top quartile of wealth for their age. They won't be in the 1%. But they'll be financially independent with options. The person who makes $85,000 saves nothing because they're too demoralized by 1% benchmarks and spends everything trying to look successful will end up in the bottom quartile, working until they're 70. Almost there. But before I wrap up, I need to show you how all of this works together, because when you see how these pieces connect, everything changes. These age-based thresholds aren't just trivia, they're a map. They show you that wealth building is a multi-decade journey with specific milestones at each stage. They show you that comparing yourself to people 20 or 30 years older is absurd. They show you that the compound effect of time is more powerful than almost any other variable. And most importantly, they show you whether you're actually on track or falling behind your true cohort. The 25-year-old who understands that 610,000 by 30 is the 1% threshold can reverse engineer what that requires. Maxing out a 401k and Roth IRA from age 22 to 29 with average market returns gets you to approximately 120 to 150,000. That's already a quarter of the way there. Add aggressive taxable investing, add potential real estate equity, add career growth and raises, and suddenly 610,000 doesn't seem impossible. It's difficult. It requires discipline and sacrifice. But it's not fantasy. The 35-year-old who realizes they're at 180,000 in net worth, which is more than double the median for their age, can stop feeling like a failure. They can set a realistic goal of 550,000 by 45, which would put them in the top 20% and on track for a comfortable retirement. They can focus on the behaviors that get them there instead of taking desperate risks trying to close an impossible gap to the 1%. The 50-year-old who has 850,000 in net worth can recognize that they're not going to hit 8.7 million by 55, but they're already double the median and in great shape for retirement. They can optimize their tax strategy, maximize their final 15 years of earning and investing, and likely retire with 1.5 to 2 million, which is more than enough for a comfortable retirement. Every age, every stage, different thresholds, different contexts. The 1% isn't one number. It's a moving target that changes with every year of your life. So here's what I want you to do. Calculate your current net worth. Compare it to the age-appropriate threshold and median for your bracket. Identify where you fall on the spectrum. Set a realistic goal for your next age milestone that's ambitious but achievable, and then execute the boring, unglamorous wealth-building behaviors that actually work. Increase income, control spending, invest consistently. Let time do its work. That's it. That's the system. What financial benchmark have you been using that's been making you feel either overconfident or demoralized? What age-specific wealth goal actually makes sense for where you are right now? Drop it in the comments, because understanding where you really stand is the first step to getting where you want to go. 10 years from now, you'll look back at this moment as either the point where you started using the right measuring stick and building real wealth, or the point where you kept chasing fantasy numbers and spinning your wheels. Your future self is watching. The boulder isn't as heavy as you think. You just needed to see the right path up the hill. Now you know where the path actually goes. Climb to walk it.